Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and we are here to go week to week on your latest TV addictions, shows that everyone's talking about, and hopefully be a viewing companion and provide context along the way. Today, I'm joined by Sona once again.
Hi.
And we're discussing the ninth episode, the penultimate episode. Love saying that word so many times on this. I'll
Such
only
a
ever
good
say that word
word.
on in the context of this podcast, by the way, of Severance, season 2, an episode called The After Hours. All right, some show notes before we get going. First of all, we hit the 100 subscribers on YouTube. So
Yay.
Sona and I believe will be recording. This is going to be our first tandem video episode. We will be recording our discussion of the finale of Severance. Boy, I'm not looking forward to the whole editing task, but I am going to do a practice run of some videos probably over the course of this weekend. Everybody in the house has been sick, Sona. I got it first. I gave it
I
to everybody
know.
else.
How are you all? It sounds awful.
I just dropped my daughter off at school late today, but she was actually fine as of yesterday. I think she just wanted to sleep in a little bit this morning. So I think everybody's okay. But Sona, I was thinking about video content. We were planning to go to Massachusetts this weekend to visit some friends. We don't want to potentially get them sick.
Of course.
So we'll be around for the weekend. And Sona, I think I'm going to go down to the Lumon facilities and do some YouTube video shorts from down there.
For real? That's so exciting.
Yeah. So I'm going to go check out the grounds,
Amazing.
pictures of the water tower and maybe some videos as well, and then go inside and see if they have any leftover Severance sets that we can walk through. I will maybe post them as some YouTube shorts. So that's some bonus content to come. I used to do a lot of video editing. I haven't done that in quite some time. So I am going to be rusty. I will try to get that content out as quickly as possible, but do expect it some point over the course of the week. And then once again, Sona and I discussing the finale of Severance. And then we'll see what do people like? And maybe we'll start putting more video content up there, especially if people actually follow us on YouTube, obviously.
Super exciting.
Of course, we continue to cover White Lotus as well. A teaser here, a couple of things. We got a lot of feedback from users. There was a question that I didn't get to ask Darren this week when I spoke to him about. In his bio, he describes that he had been an extra in a Bollywood movie, and one of the listeners wanted to have more information about that. I didn't get a chance to ask him, but I will definitely circle back to him because also he has been to Thailand for a full moon party. He said it's a wild time, given that the fact that that is what's going to happen next week on White Lotus, just a teaser for what is probably going to be a very eventful episode on Sunday night. We'll definitely be talking to him about that in our next conversation, probably midweek next week. Oh, and of course, in that conversation, we are starting to cover the series Dope Thief that I do want to bring up. The first 2 episodes are out. I've seen the first episode, which I did enjoy, directed by Ridley Scott, which is obviously a pretty big deal. I really like this. I like Wagner Moura. I like Brian Tyrese Henry. I like their chemistry. There's this comedic interplay between them, even as things get really, really dire, even by the end of episode 1, by the way, which has a very cool little twist. And I haven't even seen the second episode, which is still available, but I do recommend it so far. And we will probably be going week to week with it, definitely discussing the first 2 episodes next week. So stay tuned for all of that. Any interest in that show, Sona?
I am interested in it. I saw the little, still shot of it on the Apple app last night, and it reminded me that you will be covering it, and I am curious about it. I also am curious about Darren's Bollywood background, so
Yes.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And if I could just chime in on the issue of feedback, which you and I have texted about a little bit, I want to say, first of all, I love the comments. I love that people are engaging with the podcast. I'm excited to read all of the reviews. I want to express special appreciation for, I think the name was Eliza A, who left a review recently for us on the Apple podcast app, which nearly moved me to tears because I thought it was so kind. And I just also want to say, in connection with that, I recognize I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And there are things that I probably have misunderstood in connection with Severance. I appreciated that Eliza kind of understood our varying perspectives in this podcast and what we're trying to do, that I am not a Severance expert. all feedback is appreciated. Just, we'll say sometimes the hostility of some of the feedback takes me off guard. So yeah, that's my little piece on that.
Yes, Sona and I went back and forth quite a bit on these two recent reviews. One, which really seems to be a direct counterpoint to the other. And I really like the perspective that Eliza gave, which I think maybe to crystallize things, we have mentioned it here. I don't preface every episode with this. It would be tedious if I did. But just to be clear, we are not professional podcasters. We do this as a way to watch something together and discuss it. And I personally, and I know there are not that many people out there like this, by the way, as a film fan, and I do the same thing for TV, I like the extra context. I like to know, what did Michael Fassbender do? Like, for example, he's playing a bunch of spies. So I like, what is he doing in his career? What is this additional context that I can bring to my viewing of it? And assuming that, for example, my wife is not doing this kind of research when she watches a show like The Agency, that I am trying to add that context, assuming that the vast majority of listeners are not dedicating their lives to following this show. So maybe I can add context. And of course, any feedback from the listeners to add additional context, I love it. If I'm wrong about something, or if you have additional color for the discussion, would love to hear back from it. And really the goal of this podcast. And Sona is like my first audience. She is like my audience surrogate to a large extent. I need that, because when I do these solo episodes, I can talk about an episode for 20 or 30 minutes. I can talk about it for an hour, but the conversation goes over an hour when I have a partner, as you would expect from a conversation. That's the structure of the podcast. And that may not be what you're looking for. I understand. If you give a negative reaction, then please say something constructive, I would say, if you feel that way, or please just don't listen. I have listened to so many podcasts that were recommended to me, and I listened to a couple episodes. I don't like the dynamic. I don't think these people are evil. I just don't like the dynamic, and I don't listen anymore. That doesn't mean that I need to bash participants. And Sona doesn't get paid anything for this. I don't get paid anything for this. As a matter of fact, the show cost me much money out of my pocket when I consider the amount of time that's invested into it. But I enjoy doing it. It is disheartening. I thought of quitting the podcast multiple times. And I do appreciate, by the way, it makes me appreciate people who are in the public eye that are just trying to do something because they like it. If you're wrong one time about one thing, you are vilified for the rest of your life. So I think it's hard, but I've gotten over it, and Sona's trying to get over it.
I am working on it. Every time I think I've built a thick skin, it gets taken to a new level. Okay, my skin's not that thick.
And I choose to, by the way, Sona, I choose to see the most positive sides of things. First of all, I guess it's a compliment that people think we're professional podcasters. So I would say that on one hand. I listen to podcasts which are clearly amateur podcasts, and I enjoy it. I watch YouTube videos that are practically unedited, and I like the content. I don't assume these people are being paid by somebody. So I guess that's kind of a compliment, that I put out a polished enough product to trick people into thinking it's a real deal of business. Oh, and I also, of course, look at the fact that the vast majority of the reviews have been very positive. And of course, most of all, take the good with the bad. The podcast has been growing,
which I love,
very quickly recently, and we're getting a lot of feedback from users, especially on YouTube. I have to say, I've seen so many negative things on YouTube in general. Our YouTube feedback has been really sweet, and I really do appreciate all of that. I'm waiting for the negative comments to come in, I'm sure, and the trolls to attack. But for now, it's been very sweet and really...
yeah, I love it.
I try to take, even in the criticism, I try to take something constructive out of it. But in general, if there's nothing constructive from it, I just ignore it. So, and there is mostly positive feedback. So thank you for all the feedback. We love all of it.
As far as review writing, I think people are generally more compelled to leave negative reviews than positive reviews, just in life of anything. Right. So the fact that any listener would find the time to leave a positive review is so sweet and much appreciated, because there's really nothing but the kindness of your own heart compelling you to do that. So I think it's really, really great when people do that. And believe me, we read every single one and we appreciate every single one. And I think if you email Victor, he very often replies back to the emails as well.
Yes. I mean, practically every single time. And I would also say that I've had some negative feedback in emails. I do not want to discourage negative feedback either. And by the way, if you do want to start a conversation, the reviews are the worst place to do it. I cannot contact you there. But if you want to email me or put a comment on YouTube, I can respond. But I bring that up because I had a very negative initial reaction with somebody on via email. They had good and bad things to say about a particular episode. That we started a conversation and we've continued a conversation. It's been a very healthy conversation. So I think that even negative feedback can turn into a positive interaction. If you're using the Apple forum, Apple reviews as your starting point, I cannot respond to you. You don't have your email there. There's no way to respond in the thread to comments there. Unfortunately, that's Apple's problem. That's not your problem. Anyway, enough on that. I do want to put a pin in it because, there's been a lot of feedback. That wasn't especially hurtful, I think, to Sona review. And I love, by the way, that it seems like somebody, in my opinion, I think somebody saw that review and wrote a really beautiful response. And I thought, and by the way, just want to appreciate the fact, I didn't call it out at the moment. I think that you sharing your personal experience there really did enrich that episode and that conversation. And I do want to shout that out.
Last thing I'll say, not on the subject of reviews, but on the subject of being a casual Severance viewer who does sometimes misunderstand things. I just wanted to share a quick anecdote that my husband decided last night was the time to watch his first ever episode of Severance with me.
Oh, is he caught up, or this is just...
Oh, no, he just decided to drop in last night.
Not a good time to jump in.
Trying to explain to him,
oh God,
the plot with Dylan ended with him saying, okay, this is like who's on first, what's on second, I'm out. Right.
Yeah.
But then he got interested again when he saw Patricia Arquette, because, we know Patricia Arquette from way back.
Sure.
And said to me, she's a witch, right? She's got to be a witch. And I said no. And then in the final scene of the episode, he said, see, she's a witch.
I was about to say, I think he may have figured something out there.
So I just wanted to share that little anecdote before we dive in.
And one more shout out I want to make. We just yesterday, and I forwarded this to Sona as well, received and I've never brought this up on the podcast. We have a pen pal in Germany, Susie. Yes. Hello, Susie.
Hi, Susie.
Who gave us a beautiful email yesterday as well. I know that Susie has specifically mentioned that she used to have pen pals when she was younger, and we enjoy being your American podcasting pen pals here in America. Oh, one more thing I want to bring up that I just watched the first 2 episodes of Sona, just dropped out of the blue. You may be interested in this. There is a new show on Netflix, a British production, but Netflix money, obviously, called Adolescence. Have you seen anything about this?
I haven't heard of that.
I think you would enjoy this. And I have a feeling this is going to be one of those shows that it might go a little viral. One of the stars of this, not really the star, but one of the stars of this is a very recognizable British actor called Stephen Graham. He's also a producer on the show. A few years back, he had a movie called Boiling Point. He plays a chef. And it's one day in this restaurant and everything is going wrong. Like his life is falling apart. It's a very important day at the restaurant. This was actually an inspiration for the show The Bear. So for anybody who's a fan of The Bear. And it's shot a single shot. So it's a camera following from one character to the other. Anyway, the same writer, producer of that film now has a series called Adolescence. Stephen Graham is one of the stars of that. He plays the father of this boy who's accused of murdering this girl in his class. It is 4 episodes. I've only seen the first 2, and they're very good. And each episode is one continuous take. So it's a very tense.
Wow.
And you see like the arrest in the first moments of episode 1. They follow the kid and his family to police headquarters. He gets processed. They gets interviewed. It's really interesting. And 1 episode each. And then it jumps in time. So it's not like it continues. The next shot continues from the first. The next shot, it's a few days later. They're within the school grounds. And now they're interviewing other kids there. And it moves like the camera, unlike the first episode, moves from the police. And then it follows some of the students. And then it goes to some of the teachers. And then back to the detectives again as it moves around the school grounds. Like logistically, an incredible achievement.
Sounds like
achievement.
It.
I continuously am just lost in the story and not paying attention to the technique, but then wondering to myself, like, these actors have got to be so on point to not screw up during these shots.
Can you imagine the responsibility? Yikes.
It could be multiple takes and they like have a little cheat where they merge the shots together. I'm not sure about that. The intention is one continuous take. And it pulls it off in the fact that even if they, let's say they shot the whole thing like 5 continuous takes and they cut the best parts together, these people still had to perform the whole thing all the way through, right? So that the timing would line up. It is a pretty amazing accomplishment. And I haven't finished it yet, but the 3rd episode, which I just saw the first minutes of, and last night before I fell asleep, it is now a psychologist going in to interview the suspect, the boy, the 13-year-old, who's a very good performer, by the way. And the conversation seems to get very contentious. I think the whole episode is going to be this interaction between the two of them. So, which I think that is right up your alley, Sona.
Sounds amazing. I actually have also been watching something new, which never happens. Is this a good time to share?
I stopped even asking, but yes, please do.
I know. So my husband actually told me about this show. It's on Hulu. It's called Deli Boys. Have you heard of it?
Oh, yes, I've heard of this. I heard very good things about it.
We are enjoying it so much. It's not a serious show. It's lighthearted about a Pakistani family. Some of them are purposefully involved in the drug trade. Some of them accidentally get involved in the drug trade. That seems to be kind of a theme for shows this spring, huh?
Yes.
It's super fun to watch. It's a great ride to be on. We are really enjoying it. We have, I think, 2 episodes left that we have agreed to watch tonight. You know, we're enjoying it in that way that when you're a couple, you say, when you go out, don't watch that show without me. You better not watch that show without me, right? So it's really fun. And it's fun for me to see a show featuring almost entirely South Asian cast, which is unusual, although, you know, less unusual lately, which is great. I probably would watch almost anything centered on an entirely South Asian cast, but this happens to be very entertaining, I will say.
Yeah, I had heard good things about this, and I saw the trailer probably when we were watching Paradise. They previewed this because it premiered right in the middle of the run of that show, I think just a week or 2 ago. It looked very funny, but with all these other shows we've been watching, have not gotten around to it. But now that you're binging it, maybe I will try to at least watch part of it, and we can discuss it here in the podcast.
Yeah, it's very light, it's very fast, and it keeps you interested and entertained.
And maybe any kind of these bonus shows that we end up side conversations, maybe we'll put that for YouTube content. So
there you go.
There we go. Okay. So let's get into this episode. Before we jump into it, I actually want to talk about a couple things related to Severance, though, everybody. So don't worry. We're not going to continue digressing. We are going to talk about Severance now. First, a couple things about next week's episode. It is called Cold Harbor. So obviously very important to know what is going on with Cold Harbor. And that is going to be the finale. Second of all, Sona, we just had the shortest episode of Severance ever last week with the Cobell episode, 38 minutes long. The finale episode is 76 minutes long, 2 times as long.
Amazing.
And the longest episode ever of the show, obviously, which usually runs in the 40. I mean, it doesn't even get to 45 minutes usually. I mean, I think the longest they've had is like 55 minutes. So this is a lot longer than your average. It basically is a double episode.
And I feel like generally they pack a lot of information into the episodes we've been watching. So I can only imagine how much information will be packed into an extra long episode.
And one more piece of information that is just tantalizing to me, you know, in the United States, if something's adult, even if it just has some swear words in it, it automatically gets an MA rating just for mature, but it doesn't have this kind of granular rating. But I do want to mention that there was an article I was reading saying that where there's in New Zealand, I think it is, they have very granular rating system. Mm-hmm. This thing is rated adults only, which is the first time ever for the show. And its warnings are for sexual content and violence. So that is going to be a pretty crazy episode, apparently.
Interesting.
So gird your loins, people. It could be a rough ride.
Wow.
So this episode, an episode of departures and arrivals, mostly departures here for some of our key players. Perhaps I do feel, given the fact that thematically there's a lot of explicitly departures here, I do have a question as to what's going on with Dylan, and we can save it for that part of the episode specifically. But I do wonder if that is going to indicate a true departure here, which would be pretty sad.
Yeah, it would.
What are your general thoughts here on the episode?
Well, I like how everything is moving the story forward. As we've talked about, this whole season has been moving pretty quickly. And I think we're continuing to move things at that rate. As far as we like to say, the penultimate episode, I feel like it did the usual thing a penultimate episode does in like setting up a ton of stuff for the finale. But also, I wasn't prepared to see some possible final farewells for some of
Yeah.
these characters.
Hmm.
I was kind of surprised that that would happen here, but maybe it's not a final farewell. Maybe we will see them again. I don't know. But that was, I think, what took me off guard a little bit. The rapid progression towards perhaps these characters' final episodes, some of them.
Yeah, I think they definitely want to plant the seed, at least that we won't see these characters again at this moment, which is, I think, a good point. I can't imagine that some of these folks won't come back in a future season, but I do think that, at least in the immediate terms of the plot, they are going to disappear from what's happening here in the show, which I guess is going to be perhaps much more focused on just Cold Harbor and the whole Gemma Mark situation next week, and Helly intersecting with that, and Cobell. But it might be a much smaller group of players, so it may not be as wide
Yeah.
as we expected potentially early on.
And I felt like this episode did a good job of starting to build momentum towards
Yes.
what will happen.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you really got that feeling of like the pace starting to pick up, especially after the prior two episodes, which were not standalone episodes. They were definitely connected to the plot here.
Right.
But, they kind of were a pause in the general storyline that's happening, especially last week's episode. Here, I think, they picked up the pacing and the momentum towards what will be the finale. And it was like a distinct feeling of the energy picking up.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. The last 10 minutes or so, even with like Irv's departure, it was suspenseful. Like I thought something bad was going to happen because you just feel the suspense is building, and they're definitely starting to crank up the tension in those final moments of the episode, especially in that final beat. The witchy scene there. There's something,
Mm-hmm.
truly hellish about what it feels like we are about to enter into, which is,
Mm-hmm.
which I can't imagine being that hellish, but maybe that is what they're prepping us for. All right, so let's start things off. I guess I will explore the grounds at when I actually go visit this place this weekend. Once again, hopefully visiting it this weekend. I should have enough time to. It's not that far away from here, like less than a 1 hour drive. At least go there for a little bit. Maybe make a whole family outing out of it. This is actually pretty close to where my sister lives, so maybe we all meet there.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
Yeah, I think they're like 15 minutes or 20 minutes away from it. I'm curious about that because we have this drone shot that goes from the mansion where James lives with Helly. Terrible living arrangements for Helena, I guess I should say here. But I'm wondering if there's actually this house on the grounds behind the actual water tower there, in this actual location, or if this is kind of a little trick shot, mixing those two things together. Apparently, they live very close to the Lumon facilities. Helena has a morning routine. She goes swimming every morning. She eats her eggs exactly like Sona does.
I'm sorry, what?
You know what? You don't actually eat your eggs this way. I bring that up because you do cut your food into very, very small pieces.
Oh, I'm dying. The reason I was so appalled by that is because I can't stand eggs.
Yes.
So I was very confused because I thought, Victor, you've never seen me eat an egg in your entire life, and you're lying if you say otherwise. I love baked goods with eggs in them, but I am disgusted by eggs themselves. But yes, many have commented on my
Yeah, this is Soda's technique for eating, by the way. Not eggs, though, just to be clear. Yes.
Definitely not eggs, but
The egg
everything
person
else
is my wife. My wife could eat eggs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. She loves eggs.
Appalling for me.
I know. I agree.
If you eat a meal with me, settle in. It's going to be a while. Yeah.
It's going to take a while. I don't like her living with her dad, being as controlling as he is. And then when she asks, is he going to have breakfast that day? Of course, by the way, just context setting here, they believe this is the day that Mark is going to finish the file. It's been stuck at 96%, as we've seen in the past couple episodes. He, called in sick last episode, called in sick this episode, apparently. They're very disappointed that he is still not at work.
I mean, given the amount of little extracurricular field trips he tends to take, even when he is at work,
Yes.
I don't know why they would have the confidence that it's going to finish on this particular day. I mean, I know he's very close, 96% or whatever, but still, he tends to step away from his desk quite a bit lately.
He does. I mean, even when he does have extracurricular activity, he seems to make some pretty good progress on the files recently. So I guess they figured if he's in the building, they can always just threatening
Knock
him
out
enough.
that 4%.
Yeah, he should be able to knock it out, or at least they're hoping that he will. But back to that breakfast scene, the whole thing where he doesn't want to eat breakfast, but he'll watch her. This is all just gross to me. I'm just not enjoying this relationship between dad and daughter here at all.
Same.
And he wants her, he wishes that she ate those eggs raw. Sona, you don't like eggs. How do you like raw eggs? You've never had eggnog, I assume.
You know what? I've had coquito, which is like
Okay.
a Puerto Rican eggnog that my husband's family makes, which is delicious, if very, very strong. There's alcohol in it generally. It's not particularly eggy. I don't know if regular eggnog is eggy.
Olden days, you used to put a raw egg in with the milk. I don't know if anyone puts raw eggs into their eggnog anymore, but who knows?
I am definitely not interested in consuming a raw egg for sure. I mean, consistency wise, it just seems super creepy. Even seeing like a fried egg with a runny yolk is upsetting to me. So
No, whole side digression. I do like a sunny side up egg, but
many people do. I
on
get
like
it.
toast or something. But okay, next big scene here, I think, important, of course, and something we've been discussing a couple of times here over the course of the episode of this season. Gretchen and Dylan having that conversation. Finally, the conversation she's been avoiding. She decides to be honest with him. She's having I mean, really not an affair, but I guess an emotional affair with his innie and lying to him about it, which of course makes it even more. That's truly what makes it the affair.
I mean, they did kiss, so there is a physical aspect, even though just
There is. I mean, but I think that he feels more threatened by, of course, I think the emotional connection that she's forming with this other self of his. And of course, I think more than anything, I think if they had a healthy marriage, he would probably be like, huh, that's weird. And, were you caught up in the moment? What happened? And I mean, obviously he could be troubled by it, but I think his instant vitriol here, where he is saying, I'm going to end his life. I think he does feel like a lack of confidence in himself, with him not being able to find work after being fired from the Lumon company. Also, just probably in the marriage itself.
Well, I give her credit for being honest about it and not letting it go further. It is a very, very strange situation, right?
Yes.
That is partly the heart of what's going on here, of like you've split yourself into a different
Sure.
version that you have no idea what that person is like, whether they're anything like you, what is retained of the essence of who you are in the outside world. You have no idea or control over the decisions that person is making. So it's kind of like you're talking about a stranger, but kind of like you're not. It's very, very weird.
Yeah, I'm cheating on you with you.
Right.
I like what she tries to explain it to him. I told you about us.
Yeah.
This is a very sad scene. Innie Dylan tries to propose to her. Of course, the only thing he can make a ring out of is paper. Desperate attempt to make this proposal. And of course, she does the smart thing in saying, like, we can't see each other anymore, which of course is endangering her outie relationship. She can't have an actual innie relationship. Like, what is this? And of course, it's making him despondent about his circumstance. This, of course, leads him to actually resign this week. And then, of course, there's the whole question as to what that means.
The outside version talks about like, well, I can kill the inside version. And the inside version, essentially possibly choosing to end his own life by doing the resignation. But obviously it's not an actual suicide, like the way Helly
Yes.
tried to end her life, right? It's like a metaphysical one. I'm not sure the right word for it, but
it's like Irv's, right? It's like Irv being severed or unsevered for permanently.
It's all very interesting from a philosophical standpoint of who you are and how to end who you are.
Funny, one stray observation. I like that Helly tells him, keep the ring. Maybe you'll meet someone down here. And he's like, who am I going to meet down here? It's only O&D, only goat people.
Goats, yes.
And I was thinking in high school where it's like, well, it's a pretty limited pool of who you can date. It's like, this is the worst possible situation with that, of course. I did think it was kind of tragic when you think that Dylan, of all the four, when we first meet them, is the happiest in his circumstance because he excels at what he's doing. He feels like he has purpose, and how in a bizarre sort of way, this really does prove the fact that's called out later, that Milchick's like kinder, gentler approach is detrimental. I mean, I think he's probably trying to do it for the right reasons because he does have some feeling of empathy towards the innies, but it does end up being disastrous here when you think about the fact that him knowing that there is more to life has made his current circumstance untenable, which I think is actually something that happens in our lives as well.
I agree
But I think it's
completely.
interesting in the context of the show.
Yeah, he was happy earning his erasers or
Right. Finger
right,
traps.
whatever little rewards, and that was good for him. And yeah, now that he knows there's a whole world out there and this feeling of love, which is comes up again in a different
Yep.
context,
Mm-hmm.
it expands your horizons and makes you think about what is possible and what you really want.
Couple of questions I have for you here. One is, do you think the Audi will accept this? Because of course, theoretically, he said he just wanted this, but does he really, he just had the struggle to find work in the interim. So what is that situation? Does he just force him to go back in anyway, kind of like Helly did? And then just like Helly, does he go scorched earth? That would be interesting for the show. Although I don't know if they're going to have time to show that in the next episode. Maybe that's a season 2, or I should say season 3 question.
Well, I think they've done a really clear job of establishing that this family has a financial situation where he needs to be
Yeah.
gainfully employed and he has an issue being gainfully employed. So I feel like the outside version of him may understand that there really is no choice except to work there, at least for the time being. And if the wife has promised that it's over and she's not going back there, that might make it manageable for him for at least a short period of time until he can find other employment, if he can find other employment.
Right.
What do
But
you
he goes
think?
back to that door place and answers those questions better.
That's right. Maybe he'll be a sliding door this time.
That's right.
I guess a pocket door is a
It's
sliding
kind of a
door.
sliding door, exactly.
Yeah, it's just the first door that came to mind.
You need those big barn doors that slide. Those are I love those.
Accordion door. How about that?
There you go. Oh yeah, accordion door. That's like
Mm.
70s.
You think of a door on the top, off the top of your head. Screen door. How about screen door?
Hey, it would fit. It would fit with the motif of the show, by the way. So I think someone has an accordion door in the show for sure. Okay, let's move over to Burt and Irving. Speaking of unrequited love or thwarted love here, very chilling. Irving gets home. Burt is there in his house. Burt's reading his notes on
Mhm.
himself. Was probably a goon for Lumon at some point in the past. He's offended by this, and then of course, Burt says, "That's before I met you." Those are all things I was seeing just from observing them. So apparently, he has been observing these people. Do you have any read on this? Is he an investigator? Is he a journalist? I mean, to sever yourself, even if you're a journalist, this is pretty extreme undercover, no?
I don't have a read on it, but I do have this sense that he's like a mafia goon by the end of this
Oh,
conversation.
Burt, you mean Burt, the Burt character, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you talking about
I
Irv?
meant, do you think Irving was an investigator in taking these? Do you think he's an investigator or a private detective?
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Here I am misunderstanding something again. That happens. I don't have a take on it, but it does bring me back to those phone conversations that he
Oh, yeah.
had. And did
Mhm.
we ever get to the bottom of who he was talking to?
No, and now I hadn't even thought about it until I saw all these notes being written. At the time, I thought maybe he was talking to Ragabi because he was maybe trying to get unsevered. But now that I'm saying private investigator, maybe that explains even understanding that painting that he keeps painting over and over again, trying to get, I
The
assume,
experts hall.
yeah, trying to get that image into his innie's head. And I was thinking that maybe that was what he's been trying to do. Maybe he is an investigator of some kind. And maybe it's not that I was like, well, has he been to the testing floor? Is that what happened in his previous life? Maybe he has information from somebody and they are trying to, rescue a family member or something from the test floor. And now he is trying to use this technique of sleep depriving his innie and painting this thing over and over again to create some kind of mental image that seeps into his innie's mind, which apparently was happening. I mean, when you think back on episode 1, that was where the black ooze was coming from. Like everyone's like, what is this? Why is he suddenly seeing black ooze drip onto him? It is the memory of his painting, of course. So it is seeping in, but maybe he was hired as this is like a job he's been on for an extended period of time. Like, you know, how sometimes people try to rescue family members from a cult or something. Maybe that is what his job is. And he's been investigating all the contacts he has from Lumon. Like basically all those books, I was like, how much in research has he been doing? Was this given to him by somebody as points of investigation?
What you're saying about the paintings would be a nice parallel to the idea of trying to burn something into your eyes that Mark was doing, right? The same idea of like, if I just keep it in the forefront long enough, eventually it's going to translate or carry over into the inside world. That kind of makes sense as an approach. We've been given so little context aside from those phone calls, right? As to what
this is purely my speculating here.
And I'm remembering even going back to the first few episodes of this season, how charismatic I found the outside version of Irv and how much I wanted to know more about his outside life, but we never really did get that. And that's something that we do have for the other characters.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a very purposeful decision to keep this mysterious.
Oh, I totally agree. And it's also not, and I agree as well, that it's not something that they're forgetting about. They're planting all these seeds.
Right.
He will probably, and whatever his investigation was and whoever and why he's on this mission will probably be very important to the unraveling of the overall plot over time. And I think it's very intentional that we don't have an understanding as to who he was communicating with this whole time.
And we haven't seen much this season, as opposed to last season, about this like political backlash towards Severance, right?
Right.
It could very well be connected with all of that.
Not that it's a political thing, not as broadly, you know, we don't see it on the TV broadcast, etc. But I did like seeing it that when they go to the hometown, like basically the origin point of Lumon, that everybody there basically just despises Lumon. So it might be that might be a broad opinion across the country.
Oh, and also I would say, why didn't he hide this stuff better? Everybody seems to be able to find it.
Well, I mean, they found it in his footlocker. That's, I think, what is so disturbing about this. I assume he locks everything away in the footlocker, but as we saw, Drummond was able to, he had a key for the door. He immediately went to the footlocker. So they've probably been watching him. Who knows? Maybe they even have surveillance in the apartment.
I think they're watching everything all the time.
Sure. And they have a lot of control over this particular area. So they might, whoever is renting this unit out to him gave the keys over to Drummond. It's not like he picked the lock. But I think it's very telling that Burt is now in his apartment, has opened the footlocker, presumably, and is reading this. He is telling, in a way, telegraphing to Irving that he needs to run away. He's not just politely telling him bad things are afoot. He's telling him, we can come in here in the middle of the night and you're only alive because they haven't decided to kill you off yet. So I think he's making it very clear. They know all his secrets and he needs to leave, which of course is part of the motivation for what he decides to actually do by the end of the episode. But I did think it was interesting that he took offense at being called a goon. And he says specifically that they would never say that about you at Lumon. Lumon has very specific language for everything, which I thought that was interesting because it does say something that we've seen in the show multiple times where like this florid language can oftentimes be hiding more nefarious activities, right? Like that, just because it's written in the book, it's all above board, but it's, this is just a way to hide what you're actually doing by, which happens a lot in the real world, right? It's just using language to make extraordinary extradition or whatever, a kind of phrase for something that has a more negative connotation. Apparently he was a driver. He delivered people to who knows what.
Yeah, It sounds like he delivered them first to something pretty awful, but even by the way he says, let's go for a ride, I was worried. So
exactly, very intimidating. And this very much feels like a mob movie at this point. And this is why you hire someone like Christopher Walken to do a scene like this.
Absolutely. I had forgotten because I am not a Severance super fan. That's my last passive aggressive comment for this podcast. His last name is Goodman. which
Goodman, yes.
I had
Mhm.
forgotten.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
seems a little literal, but there's probably something there. Seems a little on the nose.
If anybody's curious about that, I had an episode where I broke down in the before this current season previewed, which of course Sona didn't watch, it didn't listen to, but I actually broke down all of the symbolism within the character names. And Sona, all these names are very
They've all got something.
symbolically literal. For example, Mark Scout, right? So you think about
Yeah,
what, you know,
sure.
a mark on a map, for example, and then a scout. And what does a scout do? You know, explores. He's the first one to go into a new terrain. The names are very literal. And Goodman is, you know, as we saw in that episode where he's with his husband, that the idea of severing him was to create a good man, right? A good version of himself, which of course he says specifically here, at least a little part of me would be good. And then, of course, to get to the train station, I got to say that in general, for this episode, I have to say that something happened with the season. And we could even spend a minute talking about the extremely negative backlash against last week's episode, which is incredible to me that some people are like, I'll quit the show because of last week's episode, which is insane because I think the season up until that point had been so strong. And I think this is just people maybe exaggerating their reaction on social media, but it does seem to have really bothered people in some strange way. And I can't quite understand why. I didn't love last week's episode, but I don't understand the vitriol against it, ironically, given the title of the episode, the sweet vitriol. And even though I defend that episode, I do feel like the rhythm of the show was a little disrupted there. And again, here, there are parts where the emotions are kind of working for me, but then there's a lot of setting up for the next episode. So it was a very awkwardly paced episode until, as you mentioned, until like the last 15 or 10, 15 minutes of the episode, where I really did start feeling my pulse was racing and I felt the stakes for next week very clearly. But until then, it was a little uneven, to say the least. But all that being said, the scene, the farewell between Burt and Irv, and where he's telling him, you need to leave, you're in danger. Burt, might be putting himself in danger considering he's probably been sent on this mission. We heard Helena say that they're going to take care. We're going to take care of Bailiff this week, Mr. Bailiff today. What does that mean? Does that mean they were sending Burt there and Burt didn't take him where he's supposed to go, took him to the train station instead? That's putting Burt at risk, right? So
that's what I think seems to have happened.
I agree. Considering that's what his job used to be, arguably maybe what his job still is, it seems that he probably did what he needed to do, got the keys from Drummond or whoever it was, showed up, put him in the car. Everything looks above board, and then he decides to not take him where they're supposed to meet him.
Yeah, and then the goodbye is so touching and painful.
I do have a question, though. How do you read? I'm going to have a very generous read on this, especially because the scene worked for me. How do you feel about the fact that this Burt, this Audi Burt, who of course does have this guilt of being a bad person, do you think he has actual feelings for Irv at this moment? Because he's basically saying that I've never had love in my life for real. And this is like this very painful moment of them letting this thing go. But that's their innies that have that love.
I know. That part is weird. Yes, I agree. It is weird. And then I thought like, well, maybe this whole idea of what you can keep separate and what you can't, and that this connection between them has carried over was kind of how I left it. But I had the same question on paper. It doesn't quite track.
Right. That's why I'm having a generous read of this, that we have seen that emotions bleed through. So maybe they just met each other, and this love that they felt inside, they don't even understand it, but there is this immediate connection to each other. It's rekindled. Maybe it can't actually be suppressed. Maybe the body keeps the score. Maybe that is all happening there. And I'm reading it that way because I like the scene and I want it to work.
Right, because otherwise it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the only choice we have.
Exactly. I have a slightly different read for Burt, that maybe he doesn't feel it the way that Irving does, but that what Burt is having is that Burt is guilty, feeling that guilt more and more as he gets older, of not being a good person. And that he's almost saying like, the good version of me, loved this person and would rescue this person. And I'm going to do what the good version of me would do. Not sure if there's the passion there. And I feel it in the
Agree.
scene that Irving is yearning and Burt's kind of like, you need to get out of here.
You got to go. Yeah. No, I totally 100% agree with everything that you saw there.
A few more questions. I didn't know you could take dogs on trains, but I guess you can. I guess that makes sense.
I had the same question. Can you, especially like not in a carrier or anything? I don't know.
I assume you can because you have the whole situation. Maybe they have like a, pet friendly train car or
Yeah,
something.
this is always my question with travel. I mean, this is a complete tangent. Even when your dog is in a carrier or whatever, some people are violently allergic to dogs. So
Yeah.
like what if you just happen to get seated in the same row as someone who's brought their dog? Then what? Neither here nor there for this particular.
I assume there has to be like a pet car on the train, if that's the case. Second question. Do you have any idea where this train station is? Very beautiful train station.
On some level, I do know the answer because I read it in a headline
Oh, you
somewhere, but
did?
I
Okay.
cannot recall it right now. But yes, it is lovely.
If it's out there, let me
Lots of
see.
train stations are really pretty stations architecturally. DC Union Station is a good one. Philadelphia 30th Street Station, also very nice. Grand Central Terminal, beautiful.
I was wondering because they shot at Grand Central if this was, oh, here it is. So this apparently is Utica Union Station in Utica, New York. So
There
now
you
we
go.
know. Oh, and the moody photography of this episode and this kind of late day sunlight that we see crossing across multiple segments of the episode here worked especially well for this farewell. I thought
For
and the
sure.
train driving into the setting sun, basically, really, metaphorically, the sunset of this relationship.
But at least he has his dog.
He does, always faithful companion. Okay, next we got to talk about Miss Wong and Milchick. This is stealthily another Milchick episode. Okay, very early on, we see that Miss Wong has been promoted. She's got the Wintertide Fellowship comes to an end. She's heading off to whatever the next stage of this thing is, which of course we found out last week. Cobell has been part of this as well, this fellowship. Interesting that they have to sacrifice something, which of course is her ring game, which she's loved this whole entire time, and that the bust of Kier, I believe, is used to smash the toy or whatever the sacrifice happens to be. It's an interesting episode for Milchick because he goes through multiple different phases here, but he's especially sadistic here in his treatment of Wong, who of course was also critical of him in his review and part of the reason he's so distressed recently. But he has some real great scenes later on in different modes. What do you think about this? How Miss Wong reacts to this whole end of her tenure?
I've developed a fondness for Miss Wong, it turns out. I'm not sure if I was aware of it until this episode. Milchick, in some ways, has redeemed himself for me and how he has grown as a character,
Yes.
right, in this. But this seemed especially cruel to me,
Yeah.
this decision. And on the one hand, I get it that like there's this coworker that's been driving you nuts and you found a way to get rid of her and like isn't that satisfying? And you kind of find it enjoyable, kind of like a Schadenfreude type of thing, maybe.
Mhm.
But still, she is a child or a teenager,
Yeah.
and he is a grown man. And it seems very mean to make her smash that little toy. What did you think?
I thought it was interesting in the fact, exactly like you mentioned, that he's very conflicted on who he shows empathy to and he does not, and very petty, of course, for him. But it does speak to the fact that he's been maybe he even went to one of these. Maybe he was a fellow at some point in the past as well. So inside the world of the Egan philosophy from an early age, because he seems to be socially retrograde in the same way that Cobell is as well. They have some weird social interactions for sure, and some strange lack of empathy across the board, as do all the Egans apparently as well.
What did you think about the idea that she's being shipped off to Scandinavia somewhere, presumably? I didn't Google the exact city name. Her bed will be rebuilt there. Like there's this obsession, right,
With the
with
beds, yeah.
beds.
Mhm.
It just seems strange to me that,
That also has something to do, I think, with the whole Rickon connection when you have that whole
right,
very funny situation in season
exactly.
one where
Yeah,
Rickon was like, you need to have all your beds present so the kid can migrate from one to the other, which
yes.
once again is the exact opposite of the Lumon philosophy of the same bed being rebuilt from one location to the other. It is weird, these parallels between the Rickon philosophy and theirs, or the counterpoints to them. Another redeeming scene, maybe the most warmth we've ever seen from Miss Wong at all. First of all, I'd say that she actually shows a little bit of warmth when she seems to not really be that committed or attached to her current role, but then seems disappointed that he's pulling the plug on her a little bit early.
I
But then,
think
of course,
also she just was not mentally prepared, right? For
right,
it to be
yes,
like, and it's happening right now.
right. But the other point I was going to make is the that she apologizes to Dylan when he quits.
Yes.
And I guess at that point she's sad because that is theoretically that is the end of Innie Dylan, right? This is somebody who is not just going home or going to go work somewhere else. He's really ending things, and I guess maybe she acknowledges that, and she apologizes for not facilitating better. And he says it's not your fault, but touching, surprisingly, between those two characters.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the first time we've really seen Miss Wong show some sort of emotion, right? Can you think
Yeah,
of another time?
I don't think so. Exactly.
Yeah.
She's been robotic up until this point in a very entertaining way.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that is once again a metaphor for there are certain people who you see them at work and they are just performing. I'm the manager. I'm the manager, and they seem to have no real personality. And then something happens, like they are crying in their office one day or something, and you're like, what? How's that possible? Because you're so
Mhm.
not ready to see them in any other context.
Oh, and we learned, speaking of first names, her first name was Eustace.
Eustace, yeah, exactly.
Mm,
I got to look that name up, see what that means.
really?
That's a new name to look up and do my research.
Oh, my heart broke for her when she was waiting for that bus.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She just looked like, such a lonely little kid with her little earmuffs on. It made me feel for her. I thought it was a very moving vignette of her.
We have no idea what the experience was of Cobell as part of this fellowship, and of course hers as well. So maybe she is pretty isolated from other folks. So this is the limited amount of time that she gets to actually work with other people on a regular basis. Although she seems to mostly just be playing with the ring toss game, so maybe that's what she's really missing the most there at the end. Later in the episode, Milchick and Drummond have this incredible interaction. Milchick in this episode seems especially sadistic, and I have been sympathetic to him multiple times in the course of this episode of this season. And Darren, for example, is just like, he's bad. He's a bad guy. I'm like, I try to defend him. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know if he's defensible in this particular episode, but I was kind of pumping my fist when Drummond calls him out and says, oh, here you are, kinder, gentler. Look how great. We were supposed to end that file
Hmm.
processing today, and look what you have done. And then he starts making him shorten his words, which is not only a bullying tactic, obviously, and a controlling tactic, but it probably feels a little racially coded here as well. And maybe the
It
show has.
really does. And, I was hesitant to raise that point, but I'm happy that you did because I think they have been playing with this
Yes.
idea
Mm-hmm.
of the racial dynamics throughout the entire season, sometimes in more obvious ways, like when you kind of give a painting that is essentially blackface.
Yes.
But, but this one is more, I don't know, it seems more than a microaggression, so I don't want to use that word. It's not something that's so outwardly obvious, but it does feel that way, especially given they keep referring to, for example, the calamitous orpo. That's a big word,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
I love the
Mm-hmm.
word calamitous. I want to work it
Yes.
into my everyday vocabulary more. I think it's great. They don't shy away from
Right.
using big words when
Mm-hmm.
they're upper level management, let's say. So why can't he use big words?
Exactly. And then he's trying to make him shorten it. And of course, we saw him punishing himself in that way by
Mm-hmm.
training himself to
Grow.
use shorter words. Grow, grow. Yes. But yeah, that was a really powerful scene as well. And it references back to this. And you think, just like we saw in that episode, he's going to abuse himself and give in. And instead, he tells him to devour feculates, which I loved. I'm like, oh, yes,
Yeeps.
that's right. Don't just tell him to eat shit, tell him to do it
Yes.
in the most florid language possible. Drummond is offended by this. And he's like, you know what? Who else is going to run your severed floor? You already got rid of Cobell. I'm the only option you have. And by the way, this happened on your watch. That's my version. That's the non-Milchick way of telling him what he just told him. But that was great. Really great.
Yeah, I mean, and an excellent point as well.
Absolutely. Which I think is great, a terrific representation of that. I've had that experience. I think we all have. Your manager or some higher up is looking for a scapegoat and they're trying to pin it on you. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like you threw this in my lap 2 days ago. And now the 2-year problem is in my court. Like, what are you talking about? He calls him out on it finally, which I thought was great.
Agree. Very satisfying.
And then, of course, the second, and speaking of how Milchick has been pulled in multiple directions here over the course of this season, he returns to his office, following up on Cobell's telling Mark that he needs to pretend everything's fine and just taking a day off from work. He does finally call in and say, I'm not coming in today. Seems pretty late in the day for that, by the way. And it's funny that Milchick is just like, hey, we'll come get you. It's like, isn't it almost sunset? Like, what? This is not the right time to show up at work. He has that conversation with him, telling him that, oh, my nosebleed is still happening. I'm here at this emergency care center. He says, I'll bring you a cab. We'll come bring you home. We'll bring you a limo. We'll bring you into work. He says, actually, you know what? I just wanted a day off, which of course we've had this conversation, I'm sure, in the past. We had that experience of being like, you know what? I'm just taking a mental health day. Sorry. And he just tells him
essentially what he's saying. Yeah,
exactly. And he says, you know what? Isn't this what the Lumon's all about? The work-life balance. It's only work. And him telling him it's only work. And Milchick hearing that and getting choked up and tearing up a little bit and looking at that painting or that photograph of the iceberg, all that going on beneath the surface, and Milchick, suppressing whatever he really is for this role. Just seeing him kind of crack emotionally there was really, this actor is really incredible, I have to say.
Totally agree with you there.
And then he just like politely says to him, can you just please come in tomorrow? And Mark is surprised. He's like sympathetic to him, going like, yeah, I'll come in tomorrow. Which may not happen actually, but he does promise to try to come in. What a great scene that was. And just the way he takes that in. What do you think is going on with Milchick in this moment?
It seems like he really is being faced with a conflict in what he has believed up until very recently, a different perspective that is there for him now, and it feels like he's struggling which thing to truly embrace and which approach to truly embrace, and whether he needs to reject everything that he likely believed for years beforehand to do what he thinks is right. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we have seen multiple times where he seems to be trying to legitimately make this tenable for the innies and keep them alive, make this project successful for that purpose, and really believes, right, as a real corporate man, that he believes in this mission that he's probably dedicated his life to, potentially, if he's been indoctrinated with this from an early age, if we, see the Cobell corollary there. He's trying to really do these reforms, and they seem to throw it back on him that these reforms were his idea. So maybe there is an aspect to it where he's trying to make this work. And then, of course, continuously being disrespected, seeing the company that supposedly lives by these codes not complying, and then blaming him for trying to work within a system, and they're not getting him any kind of real assistance. And it really does feel like a lot of corporate speak as well, like the way that this does happen in corporations, where they kept just saying that, oh no, we can succeed if you just keep, trying. You're not trying hard enough. You're not trying hard enough. And then you find out that, of course, this company's been going downhill for, a decade in hiding its sins. So those are things that happen over the course of some very famous corporate collapses. And maybe that's what we're seeing here. Maybe this whole company's falling apart. There's a skeleton crew of people left over. This is their last gasp of making this crazy technology work. And we still don't know what that giant achievement is going to be, but I think it's very important to them. Milchick's trying to square that circle of being like, I believe in it. I'm going to try to make it work. And he's just getting nothing but, basically getting blamed for all these failures, even when it's completely out of his control.
Yeah, and I think that is a very corporate thing for kind of a new manager to come in and have all of these great ideas.
Yep.
But then, when you are the person initiating that kind of change, you also are putting your head on the chopping block if that kind of change is not successful. And I did think some of these ideas were pretty wild. Like, I think it's crazy that they allowed inside Dylan, to hang out with his outside wife. Like, to me, that seems like it would just be a non-starter of an idea. I feel like it was pretty radical change as well. So he's really trying, I think, to find maybe a middle ground, but maybe realizing that the middle ground is not something that can exist in this particular circumstance.
I also find it very interesting in the course of the season that we have seen two very different versions of Milchick. We see this injured self who feels unappreciated and unseen, the iceberg under the ice, of course, and then the presentational manager version and how he tries to be tougher and tougher to impress his bosses, which I do think is important to see because, of course, he's not severed, but they are treating him as if he is two versions of himself. And he's trying to do that. I'm trying to be two different versions of myself. And of course, that's not tenable. Even when you're severed, probably is maybe the point of this whole show.
I will say also, I was very nervous for Mark when he was going to lie about where he was, because on that subject of we think Lumon is watching everything, or at least I think Lumon is watching everything, someone as important to them as Mark, I would think they are watching him. And so it would be very clear that he was lying. I'm kind of surprised that Lumon doesn't know exactly where he is, but maybe they do. I don't know. We'll see.
If you listen to the official Severance podcast, there have been multiple times when this is a reading that I've had, or one potential reading that I've had. And I think that it is, they're just explicitly saying it. There is a certain level of hubris with Lumon where they are a little overly confident that everything's going to plan. And much might explain some of the screw ups across especially when you think about I had a reading in my analysis episode that maybe the escape of the innies to the outside world was all part of a broader experiment by Lumon as to like the limits of control. Like the managers were being examined as well and how they were failing to contain the innies. So I thought that was all part of a grander scheme that maybe got a little out of control at the end, but they were pretty aware of it. But then by the time you see what happened this season, where they really truly seem to be blindsided, I think it is just them like so confident. If they just do this one thing, it's all going to work out in the end. And like all the stuff in between, they're yada yadaing without realizing that maybe this is all about to blow up in their faces.
Interesting.
Or maybe not. Maybe they are actually the ones who are right that if this thing works, whatever that more broadly is. I'm not going to ask you to speculate on what Cold Harbor is and what the whole purpose of that is, because we'll know next week anyway. But the question I have for you is, what did you think about Mark and Devon and of course Selvig/Covell meeting up, but more importantly, when she callously, I think just unintentionally callously, brings up the fact that if the file's been finished, if you've already finished the file and she's in cold storage is complete, then she's already dead. So what did you think about this, that they're going to kill her off? Do you think that that's her speculating that they're just going to clean up, or is somehow cold storage going to kill poor Gemma?
My best guess is that the outside version of her is dead, that maybe she only exists as,
oh, good point,
I don't know, a single severed person, or these multiple severed people that we saw, that like one goes to the dentist, one is in a plane crash. For whatever reason, I don't think it means literally
explicitly
her
dead.
Entire, as a human, she's dead.
Right.
I don't know why I think that, though. What was your take on it?
I didn't have a clean read on it. I actually like yours that they're talking about the fact that it would and that version of her. But I do think about what the doctor tells her in the previous episode, where she tells him to speak English, please, where he says that it will.
Something about like siring a new world. Is that the
Yes, it's going
same
to sire some new world.
exchange?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But he doesn't explicitly say that she'll see him again, but it also doesn't seem to make it sound like she is going to be killed. But I like your read that the Gemma that he knows will disappear. So
Right. Like for all intents and purposes, the person you're looking for is dead,
correct. Yeah.
is kind of how I think it might play out.
What did you think of this interaction between all three of them, basically? But how did you like the fact that I do like the fact, by the way, that when she finally sees Mark, she goes into Selvig accent again. So it's like weird
I
that
didn't notice that.
plays these different roles. She still
Mm-hmm.
comfortably goes into that particular version of herself, which doesn't work with him. He's just sick of talking to her and, even more outraged.
I mean, he has a great line here, which I didn't write down, but about like everything he's been through in the last couple of days, right? About like,
Oh yeah,
I had
I had
brain
some brain
surgery.
surgery
I'm
in my
looking for my,
basement. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
doing great. Yeah, everything's great. And she says, "Why are you antagonistic towards me? We're allies now," which of course remains to be seen. But it is funny that she'd say like, "Well, after tormenting you for years and
Mhm.
observing you and potentially being involved somehow with the actual disappearance of your wife, maybe she recruited her by living next door to them. Like all these things are on the table." And she's just like, "We're friends now, right?" Bygones be bygones.
Bygones, exactly. Well, something that was confusing here for me that like was illuminated when they get to the birthing cabins later, which we'll talk about, is what version of Mark are we seeing,
Right.
right? In the reintegration process timeline here. Like how much does he know or remember and how
Right.
much is merged? I think very purposefully unclear here.
Yeah, it's weird the way that this reintegration works. I had assumed, like we saw in the animation, that there was an actual battle of wills that would occur here over the intro, the animation in the intro, I should say specifically.
Yeah.
That there was almost like it's teased there that we might be seeing a battle of wills between the two versions. And I thought that would be thematically what we would see. And maybe that is what's going to happen here in the finale now that any Mark has been reactivated and this unification may have worked in both ways. But it seems, and this is actually, I'm glad you reminded me of this question. This seems to be that he is retrieving memories. So those memories that any Mark has are integrating into his memory timeline. But it doesn't seem like the any Mark, the intentionality of that persona is controlling him, because when we do get to the birthing cabin and any Mark
Right.
is reactivated, he's like, "Where am I?" It's not like
Right.
he has not been sharing those memories with Audi Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe really the way to say it is that I didn't understand it, and I probably still don't understand it, how the reintegration works.
I think the show needs to explain that a little bit more to
Yeah.
us, and they has not explained how this integration works across the board. I think reading it here that when we saw like the brainwaves overlapping and things, that we were just basically allowing the memories to be shared. I don't think that the persona is in there. The two persona are fighting each other. And interesting, until this moment, I had assumed that the memories might be, and maybe they are. Maybe that's actually, we just haven't seen enough of it. But maybe now that any Mark has been reactivated, that he does now have those shared memories. We just haven't, we've only spent a few minutes with him at this point. So yeah, they show up at the cabin. They wait to the night. What do you think about Devon really being so wary of this not that long ago? Do you think it's just plotting here, or do you think there's more to her aggressive pushing of Mark into this really dangerous situation? Where do you think she's at this point?
I want to talk about that, but wait, are we already at the cabin? Because I wanted to talk about something that happened before that.
Sure. Let's do it before the cabin. Yeah.
As they drive into the cabin, there's like this crazy scene, right? With the guard
Oh,
at
yes.
the
Great point.
checkpoint.
Yep.
First of all, there's like some code language being exchanged about a golden thimble.
Yeah, I didn't even catch all that stuff.
But what about that idea of like, oh, I didn't know you were coming? she's one of James. Like, is this guy
Yes.
knocking up women left and right and they're all
Yes.
being sent to this birthing
Yes.
cabin?
That is exactly what's happening there.
I mean, that's sick.
That's a good detail that I completely forgot. You mentioned also they've introduced new mythology here with some words. I didn't even write them down. I'm like, I can't deal with more mythology right now, honestly. I'm sure they will explain things later as they become essential.
Right.
But I did think that was a very interesting point, what you brought up. The way she's sneaking her in is saying this is an unofficial visit. This is one of his side pieces. And, which apparently he's just impregnating women left and right and has a whole, and I guess is why he has this birthing retreat as a way to cover all that up.
Which is
And you can
crazy.
imagine if these women are, let's say you pay these women to have a child, have this innie outie switch implanted, and you give them some money, like, this occurs obviously, you know about this in surrogacy, etc., in the real world. But could you imagine an even more extreme version of that? Not to drop names in the headlines anymore to scare people away from the podcast, but you think about Elon Musk, who has how many kids now that he's
Yeah,
artificially
12,
inseminating?
13.
How
Yeah.
many multiple women at the same time at this point? And you think about something like that, but imagine you could have it all done covertly. You have the severance procedure. You have no idea what happens in that period of time. You come out, there's money in the bank account. This is all happening secretly, right? So it is creepy to
Bananas.
think about an even more nefarious version of what would be going on. But I definitely think that is what we're seeing here, and never teased earlier, but it does.
Right.
It's a whole other layer of creepiness to this whole thing.
So thank you for validating my
Absolutely.
my read of that. As far as Devon, I don't know. I'm choosing to see it as like a desperation to get her brother back and help her brother.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm being too simplistic about it.
There's been multiple times this season where I could have a creep, like a more nefarious read on what Devon's been up to, but I can't believe that because I think about how concerned she was for seeing Mark collapse last week. She really seemed to be blindsided by that. There's a perfect example where it doesn't make any sense. If she was in on it, then why would Selvig have had to pretend to be a lactate? What do you call it?
Lactation consultant.
Lactation consultant, right? So all of that seems to be, yeah, it
And
doesn't
I
make sense.
think
It doesn't
they've
track.
kind of established in this season, maybe in last season, I just wasn't paying attention enough, her protectiveness over Mark.
Yes, right.
That leads me to believe that it is just a simple love for her brother and for Gemma,
Yeah.
who, we also had a scene about how devastating it was for her that Gemma's gone, that Mark kind of scoffed at her about.
Yeah, I think a lot. I actually think that some of the inconsistency is from having character problems in scripting this and explaining her motivations. But I do think the cleanest way to read that is the same. I think she really does care about her brother. I think you look at that flashback sequence when things were normal and Mark was a much happier version of himself, a lighter version of himself. Even
And they
Rickon seemed to
all
be,
were.
all of them, right? Even Rickon seemed to be away. He seemed to be the oddball in the group that everybody kind of lovingly joshes
Yes.
rather than like the
Yes.
freak that people don't want to hang out with.
Yes.
So all of it seemed to be a better dynamic. So maybe she just wants or hopes that things could get back to something more normal. So I am reading it that way as well.
And I think also that this show has enough going on. Does it need a double agent
Yes,
sister?
we don't need yet
Come
another.
on.
Exactly. And they get into the cabin. Innie Mark is activated. She's very sweet with him, going, "Remember the last time we talked? Don't worry, trust me." And he seems to be trusting her. She walks him upstairs into a really disturbing image, by the way, yeah, like your husband noted. And Patricia Arquette here, backlit by the fire. And then as he sees Cobell, think about how last time he saw her, she was pretending to be someone else, as was he. Devon asks him, "Do you remember the last thing you said to me?" And he goes, "She's alive." So of course we're going to pick up immediately with what that means and asking him questions about what's happening inside. So all that information is going to be conveyed to them. And of course that will be conveyed back to Mark. And will there be some kind of battle of wills?
Assuming that Devon is not a double agent, what a brilliant plan she thought of to bring him to this birthing cabin.
It all worked out.
Just want to give her credit.
Yes, I agree. I agree with all that. That's the other reason that she can't be like a double agent or something. She seems to have come up with this crazy idea And then they tell Cobell about it in that car ride, obviously off screen at the end of last week's episode. And she seems to be on board with it, which is interesting too. She didn't push back at all, apparently. But it doesn't seem like they're in cahoots. One more scene we got to talk about, of course, is that Helly, Helly, of course, has been wanting to get Dylan to continue on Burt's mission. He had left him that map going, that's one more thing you can do. Dylan is so devastated by this that he doesn't even bother trying to do that. But then we see Helly stayed extra late at work, and she is trying to memorize every twist and turn to get to.
It seems like a nightmare of a task to try and memorize. Left, right, right, left.
It's like those codes in the old Nintendos. I don't know why she doesn't just bring it with her, to be honest. I
guess she doesn't want to have it on her in case something goes wrong.
I mean, she could just have like arrows on a piece of paper, and she can, ball it up into her hand, and would people know what that means? And keep the original, like if she doesn't want to lose it, keep the original at her desk, and just, I don't know. This seems like a very bad plan on her part. But in the midst of trying to memorize it, she is approached by James again, the dad. And I love her reaction. She's just like, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is going to happen, but I really do hope it does. I cannot wait for any Helly to tell this freak what a freak he is. I really can't wait. What'd you think of this final moment? Very creepy, of course, part of that suspense.
Very creepy, very much a sense of foreboding doom. I don't know in what way I could expect there to be some sort of doom, but it's there.
What does he say to her when he sees her there?
My Helly, was it something like that?
Aha, yes, I found it. Thank you, Google AI. He says, you tricked me, my Helly. But he doesn't seem to be reacting to her memorizing the map, because I think it is important that she tucks it under the keyboard. That I think that's got to be there for someone else to find. You tricked me. What could that mean?
I really don't have any ideas as far as what has recently happened.
Oh, you know what? I think I know. The last time these two persona were in the same room together, I have to say persona because obviously not their bodies, but the last time that they was when he was in the bathroom with her before she spoke, and he had that conversation with her, but he was talking to Helly and he thought he was talking to Helena. So she tricked him into thinking she was Helena.
True, but how long ago was that now? How much time has elapsed?
That's the finale of episode 1. So whatever amount of time that was, probably months.
Not 5 months. We know that, but
not 5 months. Yeah. I think it's probably just a couple of months, to be honest.
It still seems like if he was wanting to have a well, I guess she was undercover until recently.
Right. Most of this season, she was undercover. Right. So Helly, it's proper, has only been back for whatever weeks at this point.
Okay. My original response was, if you really had a bone to pick on that, why would you wait this long? But I guess she was undercover for most of the time.
More importantly is, why would he want to talk to any Helly?
Yeah.
That's the more disturbing part of all this, that what is his intentions with talking to her? And that's why I hope that, if he's saying to her, hey, as soon as this project's over, you're going to go bye-bye. And he wants to like really rub it in. I hope she gets to tell him everything she wants to tell him. Because that would be troubling. Imagine being this father and having whatever opinion you have of your daughter and your relationship with her, and she probably has all these things she doesn't say to him that she probably feels. It turns out, we've discovered here, that Helena and Helly may not be that different. She's going to lay it all out there for him. I really can't wait to see that. We'll have to wait another week to know.
I'm excited to see how this all goes next week. I think they have generally, set a lot of things into motion. I think they generally have very well constructed storylines. It's very well thought out. I don't think this is a show that generally hand waves things or leaves loose ends. So I'm really curious what we're going to learn.
Yeah, I'm very curious for the ending, because unlike a lot of other shows like The Sopranos or something like that, where you hear that the creator of the show at some point backlashed at saying like, well, people expect the show to be like this, and I'm not going to do that. That it's quite the opposite, that Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller are obsessed with basically giving the audience this gut punch of a finale for season 1 and have been wanting to intentionally give us something else that will keep us on the hook through another season. I can't wait to see what they have in store for us. I really can't.
Do you think we're going to see Gemma next week?
I am nearly certain that we're going to see Gemma next week.
I hope so.
If I was going to predict what we're going to see, not the payoff, so please don't attack me for having spoilers. I know some critics have seen the end of the show. I have not seen anything beyond this point. And I'm not a critic, by the way, who gets screeners. I wish I did, but I do not. And if anyone out there can get me screeners, please do right now. Contact me and send me screeners. And you'll get that video episode even earlier because we will pre-record it at the most convenient time possible. Anyway, that's not going to happen, but I wish it would. But anyway, regarding the finale, I would expect some things we're going to see. I think James is going to take Helly down to the testing floor. I think he's going to be like, you really want to know? Let me tell you what's going on here, right? That's what I think is going to happen. And then the map is left behind so that now if Helly is trapped down there, we see in the credit sequence that Helly and Miss Casey / Gemma are revealed in that elevator for a split second. So is Helly down there as well?
Good point.
Somebody will have access to that map. What is going to happen with integrated Mark going down into the severed floor? What's going to happen internally? Are we going to see the battle of the two selves as he descends into that lower floor? But I think we're definitely going to see a descent into the lower floors, all foregrounded, by the way, or previewed in the hellish imagery here at the end of this episode. But yeah, I think it's going to be obviously eventful. If you need twice as much episode to get it all in, a lot of stuff is going to happen. Rather than are we going to see Miss Casey / Gemma, which I really do believe we're going to see, do you think we're going to see Dylan maybe at home? Do you think we're going to see that? There's a lot of time here. So do you think we do see where does Irving land? Do we see him talking to this other contact? Do we see Dylan? Or do you think those are such side stories that we have to wait another season for it?
My guess is we won't see Irving and we will see Dylan.
I feel the same way. I feel that Irving, really, they left things on such a pretty beautiful, emotional note that we'll catch up with them next season. But I do think that maybe we see Dylan on the outside immediately. Maybe he's the one who goes and finds the map again. And finally, actually, that would be poetic justice in a way. Imagine that everybody's trapped on the testing floor and Dylan does get forced back in. And he's like, well, if I'm here, I'm going to go scorched earth. And he finds that map. And finally, after shying away from it multiple times, has to go on that mission. By the way, he's the one, right, that held the gates open.
I was about to say kind of a parallel to last season.
Exactly. So maybe that's what we're going to see.
They've been showing us that hang in there poster.
Exactly. So. Maybe he's going to be the rescuer of them all. Reluctantly, the most reluctant to normally.
Reluctant hero.
Is the hero yet again. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Yeah, so maybe that's what we see. All right, cool. Anyway, we don't have to wait that long to find out.
That's right. We'll know soon enough.
I know. And this is conversation went longer than I expected. I can only imagine how long our conversation is going to be.
Clear your schedule for the whole day.
Everybody, you guys will be listening to this episode, next week's episode, for the rest of the week. All right. Thanks again for the conversation.
Thanks. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.